the program. Today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Nedley, who is coming to speak to us on the topic of mental health. There will be time, about 20 minutes at the end of the program, to ask questions. So if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat section, which I'll be monitoring, or you can raise your hand. So you can do this by going to participants and then clicking raise hand. We will also be monitoring YouTube. So those who are watching with us online on YouTube, you can leave your comments in the chat section on YouTube, and we will also be monitoring that. Now to hand over to Dr. Nedley. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be joining you from the Sierra Mountains in Weimar, California. And this is the place where people come, usually from all over the world, but lately only from the United States of America due to the COVID crisis and the limitation in travel. But the COVID crisis has not shut down Weimar Institute because we are seen as essential since we are dealing with health of serious diseases, including mental illness. And so our programs continue to go on, and our healing programs in particular are still popular, although no longer from international participants. So when it opens up again, you may want to take advantage of viewing this beautiful area of the world if there is a need. We are here for you. So today I'm going to be talking, I've been asked to talk about mental illness and recognizing mental illness as well as how we can begin the healing process of mental illness. And basically, emotional health is understanding your emotions and the emotions of others and responding to those emotions in a healthy way. And we see that our world in general is having more and more challenges along this area. And it's been well documented in the scientific literature that mental illness is actually exponentially rising throughout the world, even now in more third world countries. So our behaviors have been shown to powerfully influence our thoughts and emotions. So when we get to the healing aspect of things, we are going to be talking about behaviors that can actually improve our biochemistry and improve our brain's ability to function and actually be able to manage our emotions. But it's our thoughts that cause our emotions and behavior. And so if we just talk about behaviors and improving emotional health, we're going to be missing the comprehensive solution, because the comprehensive solution not only involves behaviors, but it also involves our thoughts, actually listening to our thoughts, recognizing distortions in those thoughts, and actually correcting those thoughts. As the Apostle Paul stated a long time ago, we are renewed, or we are transformed. Our brain is transformed by the renewing of our mind. And that means actually changing our thoughts into what is true and accurate and also helpful for us and others. There are 5 components of emotional health. The first is knowing our emotions. That means to be able to identify the emotions that we are feeling, but not only identify them, but to also know why we are experiencing those emotions. And if we don't know why, or often people with mental health challenges are actually believing it's the wrong cause of knowing their emotions. They think their emotions are simply due to what somebody did to them or what somebody said about them. And although that might have had an impact, it's actually their thoughts about what they did or said that causes their emotions. And so when people come through our healing programs, we spend a lot of time on self-awareness. Most people have negative automatic thoughts that they've never even really tried to analyze. They just assume they're true. But it's actually far better when we can listen to our thoughts and actually start to analyze them. And that's something that requires some self-awareness to do so. And so a lot of times the first half of our program is encompassed with this aspect of emotional health. The second aspect of emotional health, or second component, is managing our emotions. People with emotional health challenges are managed by their emotions, and that's distinctly different. People that are experiencing emotional and mental health, they still have powerful emotions, but they're managing those emotions, which is distinctly different. And this actually touches an area that we now know is the #1 problem in all the world. We cannot manage our emotions, or I should say, if we do not manage our emotions, we will not have comprehensive self-control. And Dr. Baumeister, now the most quoted researcher in the world from Stanford, has made it clear that the #1 problem in all the world is actually not police brutality, as important as that is. It's not immigration issues. It's not even economic issues. The #1 problem in all of the world is actually lack of comprehensive self-control. And the interesting thing about this #1 problem is that nobody talks about it. You know, over here in America, the Republicans don't talk about it. The Democrats don't talk about it. The president doesn't talk about it. Congress doesn't talk about it. The protesters don't talk about it. It's the elephant in the room, and nobody is talking about it. We're talking about things that are actually of lesser importance. And it's one of the reasons why emotional illness is skyrocketing, because we're not addressing the top problems in the world. Now, you might say, why is lack of self-control the #1 problem? Well, you know, when we take a look at causes of death, heart disease is still the #1 cause of death, but yet we know how to prevent it and even reverse it if we put into practice what science tells us what we should be putting into our body and what we should be doing with our body, with nutrition and lifestyle. Harvard says 80% of cancers are completely preventable if we would put into practice what we know. So, and then when we take a look at unwanted pregnancy, when we take a look at murder rates, rape, relationship issues, financial issues on an individual level or on a corporate level, the underlying problems most of the time in those areas are going to be due to lack of self-control. And so when you, and I just scratched the surface when we talk about addictions. By the way, addictions are at an all-time high. Over 80% of our young people are actually addicted to their devices, and they fit the definition of addiction. Addiction is lack of self-control. We know it's harming us, but we can't seem to stay away from it. And we don't know how to manage our emotions, essentially. And that's why we have lack of self-control. And so this is a very important aspect of emotional health, and one that can be achieved. A third aspect is recognizing emotions in others. It's not just about us. It's also about relationships, and it's about others. And empathy is one of those aspects of emotional health, to be able to understand what people are going through and what they're thinking and feeling, and to be able to enter into their world, really to be able to help them. The fourth aspect is managing relationships with others. Emotional health, we're not necessarily going to be able to get along with everybody per se, but we're going to be able to get along with most people. And we are going to be able to have some good social relationships, not on screens per se, but real social interactions, face-to-face social interactions that are very meaningful and are very helpful to both parties. And this is what we call social intelligence. And then the fifth area of emotional health is motivating ourselves to achieve our goals. In the word emotion is another word, and that is motion. If our emotions are based on what's true and accurate, it should powerfully motivate us to achieve our goals. And if you find people that have a high IQ but have not done well in school, or don't seem to have purpose in life, this is actually due to emotional health problems. These are actually lack of even emotional intelligence. And so achieving worthy goals and being motivated to do so is an important part of emotional health, proper motivation. Daniel Goleman, who actually coined the term emotional intelligence back in 1990, a few years ago, put out some signs of mental health. Now, these are not the normal signs of mental health that you might see in like the DSM. In fact, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Diagnosing All Mental Illnesses, it really doesn't talk much about mental health, virtually at all. It talks about mental illness and then all the categories of mental illness and how to diagnose this mental illness part of things. And of course, we utilize that so that we're all talking the same language. When I diagnose major depression or I diagnose an anxiety disorder, I'm actually using the DSM criteria so that every other health practitioner or mental health practitioner can know precisely what diagnosis and what symptoms the individual is manifesting. But if we take a step back, there are signs of mental health, and if these signs are not present, these are actually signs of mental illness. And these aren't signs that, like I mentioned, that the DSM mentions. The DSM is going to talk about maybe one of these things or two of these things, but it turns out that if we would take a look at this pattern, we'd be able to, in our lay common association, be able to pick up on mental health challenges on ourselves or in other individuals. So one of the signs of mental health is you're curious about people you don't know. If you see someone sitting on an airplane and they have no interest in talking to the person next to them or getting to know them, this is actually a sign of mental health challenges. It's normal and it's mentally healthy that when people come in contact with us, that we would like to get to know them and we're curious about it. Of course, we're more challenged than ever before. It used to be easier before the advent of smartphones, but because people are so much into their devices instead of face-to-face social interaction, you have to be a little intentional sometimes about getting to know the people you don't know around you. But if you don't have any interest in that, clear sign of mental illness. A knowledge of your own strengths and weaknesses. And there are many individuals that think they're very strong in areas that they're very weak in. And they have a false perception of themselves. And then I also run into people that have huge talents in certain areas, but they diminish those talents. And they actually think that they actually don't have the talents that they have. This is actually a sign of emotional and mental health illness or mental illness. Able to focus without easily getting distracted. Individuals with mental illness will be much more easily distracted. And so they have trouble being able to focus, even when it would be very rewarding for them to focus. And a little blip crosses their screen or whatever, and they're going to change their focus and try to go to something that's of lesser importance than what they're actually working on. And this is something that is hugely skyrocketing throughout the world, and it has been tied in to screens, tied into laptops and particularly smartphones and iPads, because when you get on your laptop to work on something, chances are you have push notifications. And those push notifications are actually designed by engineers to figure out what it is that you actually like. So you might need to be doing something very important on your computer, but your computer has figured out through analysis that you actually are interested in BMWs. And so all of a sudden, a BMW will flash across your screen. And of course, since you have an interest in that, your attention is diverted. And this diversion of attention that continues to occur, particularly in our young people, actually impairs their frontal lobe anterior cingulate gyrus. And this is also the area of their brain that is helpful in managing distressing emotions. So if you're always being distracted and you have a problem with distraction, by definition, you are actually going to have a problem managing your distressing emotions. And of course, there is a way out of that in a way that the brain can heal and improve, but it is a process. When you're upset, if you have mental health, you may get upset, even if you're mentally healthy, but you know exactly why. And once again, it's not just what someone did to you or someone cutting you off in traffic. It's actually your thoughts about that. So this is what we call responsibility as well. We're actually more responsible for our emotional health than many people understand. And this is something for us to, it's really foundational once we can understand how we can think more rationally and more helpfully, how instantaneously it can make a huge difference in our ability to understand our own upsetness and to be able to change that if we don't want to be upset. You can get along with most people. If you have mental health challenges, you might still think you're getting along with most people, but there are relationship issues that are much more common in those that have mental health challenges. You care deeply about being a good moral person. This is part of humanity and part of the good side of humanity. But if we actually don't care about that, or we diminish or minimize the things that we are doing wrong or immoral in being immoral, it's actually a sign of mental illness. Mentally healthy people will take time to slow down and help others. It's not just about them, it's about helping humanity around them. And if they're in a good position to be able to help others, they're actually willing to even sacrifice for the good of others. If they are not mentally healthy, they're much more self-focused, and they don't even notice sometimes when others need help. Or if they do need help, they're giving excuses as to why they can't do it. If you're good at reading at other people's emotions and their facial expressions, that's part of mental health. People with mental illness have a lot more challenges in being able to accurately read other people. If you're a good judge of character, that's a sign of mental health. And there are mentally ill people that actually think that certain characters around them are great, and they only see the superficial. They can't understand some of the deeper issues because of their mental illness. Accuracy in thought is very important to those with mental illness. Truth is very important. Truth is not subjugated to the ground. A lot of people think the only way we can have unity is to put truth aside. But mentally healthy people are very interested in what is true and accurate, and they're wanting to make sure that they're thinking true and accurate thoughts. And of course, we are now dealing in an age today, we used to call it the postmodern age, but now it's known as the post-truth age. And this is, of course, very dangerous. It's one of the reasons why mental illness is accelerating greatly, because truth is no longer important. In fact, for many people, their feelings are far more important than what is actually true. And they are willing to actually denigrate truth and even not want to hear truth if it makes them feel a certain way, and they will actually blame others for pointing out truths that make them feel a certain way. And this is a clear sign of mental illness. Self-motivated. A person who is not mentally healthy is going to need all sorts of external factors to stay motivated. It doesn't come from inside of them. And of course, in our mental health programs, this is one of the things that we're very particular on. We treat each patient with love and care and concern. They can see that we have empathy for them, but they have to have accountability. They have to get up on time. They have to exercise. They have to eat those good foods. And we actually even record what they're eating, so we know that they're getting enough tryptophan and those sorts of things. And that comes from external. This is why people actually need residential programs, because if you just give them the information, they might have that information, but they are not actually self-motivated. And some people are going to be more self-motivated than others. Sometimes if you just give them information and reading a book, they can change their life. But the average person with mental illness is not going to be able to do that. But eventually, they can become self-motivated as their brain improves and as their thoughts improve. It's amazing how their motivation can skyrocket. One of the signs of mental health is you know when to say no. I talked about mental health is also slowing down and helping others, but actually knowing when to say no is an important part. And when should you say no? Well, if someone else could help the person better than you can because it's their area of expertise, then it would be good for you to refer them and say, I know you're asking me, but I'm not the best person to help you. And so why don't you ask this individual who could be the best one? And so knowing when to say no, of course, is very important, and even in regards to moral issues as well. After a fall or lapse, and all of us are human beings, we are going to fall and lapse at times, a mentally healthy person will actually take responsibility for it. They're not going to go into defensiveness and denial. If they've messed up, they're going to own it, and they're going to say, I take responsibility for this. And they will go into repair and redemption, but they will also get right back up, meaning that they're going to learn from their mistakes, and they're actually going to become better people over time. And also a sign of mental health is when you have a strong work ethic and you combine that with talents. And normally mentally healthy people can actually, if they have all these other factors on board, they can become great, positive, transformative leaders in society. And these are the type of leaders that are becoming very rare. And it's one of the reasons why mental illness is skyrocketing, is because we don't have leaders that are mentally healthy as much as we used to be able to look up to. And thus the mental illness of our leaders is exacerbated in those that they are actually leading. So back to the individual then, if people do have challenges along this line, that's when it may require a health professional or someone who's had training. We have a 17-hour training that's an online training that we put people through to actually put on our depression and anxiety recovery program. You'll learn how to diagnose it. You'll learn how to know whether it's mild, moderate, or severe, or those type of things. But just count, be clear that if there's issues in at least more than one of those areas that I just talked about, there's going to be mental illness lurking. It might be a mild degree. If you have all 14 of those problems, it's severe. And so it gets down to actually the brain and how it's working. And of course, this is who we are. When people ask, who are you? They're not actually talking about your hair or even the color of your skin or even your eyes or your nose or your feet. These are all part of you. But they're actually talking about, when they're saying, who are you? They're talking about your brain. Your brain is you. And the wonderful thing about our brain is it can change. And we are very clear, the evidence is overwhelming now, that when we heal the biochemistry of the brain, we can actually heal the brain, which requires a process. Now, if you see on the screen here, this is a synapse. This is where every pharmaceutical company is trying to manipulate, because these are the most commonly sold drugs now in the world, are antidepressants and mind-altering drugs. But if you see here, this is taking a look at serotonin. It tells you how it's made up there. First, we have to have tryptophan in that neuron. And then we have to have the pathway to turn that into 5-hydroxytryptophan or serotonin. Then that is stored in vesicles. And when an electrical transmission occurs, there is a release of that serotonin. And if there's serotonin receptors on the neuron next to it, then that neuron fires, and that's how communication occurs in the brain. But because of biochemical issues, sometimes unintentional lifestyle and nutritional measures on behalf of the patient where they don't realize they are harming their ability of their brain to make this, or there might be some genetic challenges on top of this, the serotonin may get shorted there, And if it gets shorted, then communication can't as easily occur. And so the drugs that are used for these issues do not actually help you to make more serotonin. They don't help you to get more tryptophan into the brain. What they do is they block those things on the side called the serotonin reuptake transporters. And I have my arrow there here. These are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. It's the most common drug used for depression. And this will actually plug these vacuum cleaners. Now, after an electrical transmission occurs, the serotonin is released and it's to be vacuumed back up into the neuron so it can be saved for future usage. But if you're short in serotonin, the idea is if we block these vacuum cleaners, then the serotonin won't be vacuumed back in as readily, and we'll have more serotonin in the synapse, and then we'll have more what we call serotonin activity, where we're able to get that neuron to fire. And the problem with those vacuum cleaners, though, is they can produce some short-term gain, but they can produce long-term problems, because if you're not vacuuming the serotonin back up again, what do you think is happening? We're actually going to deplete the neuron of the very substance that was short of originally. And this is why after 6 to 9 months or maybe a year of utilizing these drugs, the patient now gets as depressed as they were before, but now they're taking the drug, and then they're having to take more of the drug, or they're having to take a combination of drugs. And unfortunately, their healthcare provider is not telling them what they could do to actually make more serotonin to begin with. And of course, this is a far more effective option. You're not going to have even the side effects of blocking these vacuum cleaners. Two of the most common side effects is an I don't care attitude. The mood can be elevated over, having crying spells, but because you don't care, the crying spells are gone. And so you feel better that way because you're not always crying, but it increases impulsivity at the same time. And this is something that can actually increase the risk of suicide, because suicide is often an impulsive act. In fact, it worsens impulsivity before it actually improves depression. And that's why they have these black box warnings. If you're giving someone who's suicidal and has depression one of these SSRIs, you could tip them over the edge, and they're going to be more likely to commit suicide the first month it's used before it has a chance to really work as well. And so we don't get into those problems when we're actually getting more tryptophan into the brain, and when we're doing things lifestyle-wise to improve our ability to make serotonin. And so in our mental illness patients, we are doing everything we can to help them correct the biochemical defects that are actually exacerbating their issue. And so what are some of the things that we do? I'd like to mention, this in order of the creation story. And of course, God is not only the creator, he's the recreator. But on day one, God said, let there be what? Let there be light. And it turns out light helps our brain. Now, darkness helps it at night because this is how we make melatonin, but we won't even be able to make melatonin if we didn't have enough light in the daytime. And it's particularly important to get that light early in the morning to set our body clock. And this helps with our sleep-wake cycles. So one of the first things we do with patients, if they come to us in the wintertime, we're actually giving them a medical grade light box that simulates the blue sky and the right lux that will improve their ability to produce serotonin. We actually, it's light through the eyes that actually helps that tryptophan to turn into serotonin. And then it also sets the body clock. So after 7 days of this light, they're actually able to sleep far better, and they have more energy in the daytime. A simple therapy, but well documented to help. Now, the second day of creation, the waters were separated from the waters. And water is an important part. Our brain has to be hydrated in order for it to work efficiently and well. But in healing the brain, we actually separate waters from the waters, and we have a hot tub and we have a cold tub. And those two separations actually are utilized to help with what we call natural shockwave treatments. This is actually going to improve circulation of the brain. It's going to help to get rid of those toxins. And it's pretty amazing as to what happens. We also have to give them cognitive behavioral therapy in this process, because there are many people that think that they're going to die by getting into water that's 15 degrees Celsius. That's all the cold that we're doing, as far as, you know, the cold aspect. It's not an ice bath. It's actually 15 degrees Celsius, well above the ice level. But as we do the contrast of the heat, which is going to be more like 39 degrees Celsius with 15 degrees Celsius, and alternate back and forth, this can make a huge difference. And it also helps them to improve their frustration tolerance. One of the characteristics of mental illness is people that have a hard time being able to tolerate the normal frustrations of life, or even some of the abnormal frustrations of life. They just totally lose it when there are more than the usual frustrations. And so we help them we actually teach them a song that can help them beyond hydrotherapy that goes like this. I don't like it. I don't like it. It's okay. It's okay. I can stand it anyway. I can stand it anyway. I'm all right. I'm all right. And that little simple song, as they're getting into the cold, helps them to realize just because they don't like it doesn't mean they can't stand it. And in fact, it will help them. And what we have noticed is within a week, these individuals are looking forward to their hydrotherapy treatments. In fact, when the program's over with, they're all often paying the hydrotherapist under the table to give them one more treatment, because they enjoy it so much and they enjoy the effects of it so much. And so hydrotherapy is part of healing the biochemistry of a diseased mind. And then, of course, the third day of creation is when plants were created. And we had all of this vegetation and antioxidants and lack of arachidonic acid and oxidized cholesterol, as well as nutrition that has adequate tryptophan and tyrosine and carriers to help it get into the brain, are an important part of being able to heal that biochemistry. And then the fourth day of creation is actually when we had the darkness. And that was when the darkness alternated with the light. And darkness is very important. In a lot of cities, people aren't sleeping in darkness, or they have their television on, or they have lights on all night long. This is actually not good for the brain. It's not good for the body. It's not good for the bones. We're not able to make melatonin, which is something that's very potent antioxidant. It even can help us against COVID, studies have shown. It's 30 times more potent than the most potent vitamin antioxidant, which is vitamin E. Vitamin E is the most potent antioxidant vitamin, but melatonin 30 times more potent. But we have to be in darkness in order to get that melatonin production at night, which can help our brain in so many ways. And then later on in creation, of course, with the fifth day, we didn't have really creatures moving around, but in the fifth day, creatures were created to move. And physical exercise is an important part of our program. In fact, studies have shown that becoming physically fit is actually better for your brain than it is your body. And we know how good it is for the body, but it's excellent for the brain. It actually improves our receptor levels, something that these drugs aren't going to do. It actually improves our ability to uptake serotonin and actually able to produce it, as well as dopamine and other neurotransmitters. And so becoming physically fit is vitally important. And of course, in someone with depression or anxiety, they don't want to exercise. They don't think it's going to help them. They might have tried it once or twice and it didn't seem to work, but they'll need that accountability factor where they're getting out there and exercising. And in our program, if they're able to, we might exercise them as much as 2 or 3 hours a day to really get a jump start in improving their fitness. Not all at once, they'll do it intermittently at that level so that they can really start improving their brain biochemistry. And then we also deal with the genetic challenges after the fall. came in, mutations, what we call genetic entropy, started. And there are many individuals that have mutation issues that by themselves are not going to cause mental illness. In fact, virtually all of these mutations related to depression and anxiety, it's genetics that loads the gun and it's lifestyle that pulls the trigger. But it is important to understand the genetic issue behind it, because often we can get rid of that genetic problem. We can totally shut down that mutated gene once we know what it is with actually natural means. In other words, we don't have to take drugs for it. We can, through natural means, totally shut it down, and we can actually measure it afterwards. So when people come to our program, we're testing them with epigenetics. That means, do they have the gene and is it active? And then as we do certain nutrition and lifestyle measures, we can actually remeasure it and find out that that gene is totally inactive. And of course, this is wonderful because we don't have to necessarily suffer the diseases of our parents and siblings once we understand that. And of course, the relationship issues. On the sixth day of creation, God said something even before sin came into the world. And he said, it is not good. He was talking about every day being good. And when he created man, very good. But then he also said, it is not good, before sin came into the world. And I think some of you know what the rest of the phrase was. It is not good for man to be alone. We were created to be social creatures, and we were created for healthy attachments. And this is also something that is at an all-time low. When our parents are more connected with their devices and are utilizing their devices, they are not connecting with their kids. And when parents are not connecting with their kids are much more likely to get addicted to devices. And these are actually some major attachment issues are forming because of devices and lack of availability of good, healthy face-to-face interaction. And this is something that we deal with in our program. Those devices are gone when they come. They bring them, of course, but they give them to us before the actual program starts. Our first lecture is actually on devices and what it does to brain chemistry, so that they can have buy-in and they realize this is going to be okay. But many kids actually experience more of an emotional loss, grief, over losing a device than they would over losing a parent, or where they would over losing a sibling. And in reality, you can understand it because they spend more time with their devices than they do their parents or their siblings. And they have their attachments in regards to those devices. And of course, that's unhealthy social attachments that are forming there. Social media has actually made us antisocial. And of course, there can be other reasons beyond just devices causing developmental attachment issues. And these are why we have good professional counselors that can heal, help them with their particular attachment issue and what they need to be very intentional on to heal that attachment issue so it doesn't spread into other areas of life and adversely affect them in so many ways. And of course, part of those attachment issues can be due to trauma, abuse, losses, disappointments, being treated unfairly, which all of us, if we live long enough, are going to be treated unfairly at times because we live in a world that is sinful. But we can't, in fact, if we demand that the world be fair at all times, we are going to have mental health issues because that's something that's just not going to happen. What we need to have is the resilience so we know how to handle things emotionally when we are treated unfairly and how we can turn some of those disappointments actually into appointments. But then we have abuse at an all-time high, trauma at an all-time high. These are things that require good therapists to be able to get to the mental filters, because whenever we have trauma, for instance, post-traumatic stress disorder, we always have a mental filter that we apply to other aspects of life that really shouldn't be applied to other aspects of life. And so this is why it requires someone to be able to understand what particular mental filter you have and then be able to give you insight as to what that mental filter is, and then how you can be intentional and forceful to look for evidence to support a different way of thinking that's actually a more rational way of thinking about a lot of situations and the world around us. And so this course, of course, involves neuroplasticity. And neuroplasticity means that the brain can change. Prior to, a couple of decades ago, the previous scientific consensus was that the brain develops during a critical period in early childhood and then remains relatively unchanged or static. But now we know that the brain has the ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. And those new neural connections often start to form as a result of our treatment programs, not just our residential programs, but we also have community outpatient programs. And recently, we've also introduced an online program where you can get the support and the group that you need to start this neuroplasticity process. And positive neuroplasticity can make your brain quite resilient and is the process by which all permanent learning takes place in your brain. Of course, we utilize this when we're learning to play a musical instrument or mastering a different language or even ice skating. But we can also utilize neuroplasticity to actually get rid of mental illness, and it can be replaced with a transformative brain that is mentally healthy. And of course, neuroplasticity has enabled people to recover from stroke, injury, birth abnormalities, even overcome autism, ADD and ADHD, and even learning disabilities, but especially to be able to pull out of depression, anxiety disorders, addictions, and even reverse obsessive compulsive patterns. So this is the brain's ability to reorganize itself, both physically and functionally. And this is actually occurring throughout your life due to your environment, your behavior, your thinking, and your emotions. And if you don't have a healthy environment and you're partaking of that unhealthy environment and you don't have unhealthy thinking, neuroplasticity can go negatively. It can actually change the brain far for the worse. But this actually means that we're not stuck with the brain we're born with or the brain that we have now. And we can turn on the positive neuroplasticity switches. Things that will turn those on are focused attention, determination, hard work, and maintaining overall brain health. And of course, this is challenging when you have a mentally ill person who is not motivated and is not really willing to work hard. This is a clear sign that they need a residential program to help them with this, because once their brain becomes healthy and they are given appropriate, healthy, loving accountability with empathy, all of those other things can change. And then when those start to change, then positive neuroplasticity becomes very possible. But it's clear that the greater the effort, the greater the change. If you're intensely focused on a task and really trying to master something for an important reason, the change that is experienced will be greater. And there are things that can help us with this change, like BDNF. This is a protein that it works as a brain fertilizer in the brain. It helps to develop new connections, repair failing brain cells, and protect healthy brain cells. Having enough BDNF around can even protect our brains from neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. And this is something that we can actually measure in the bloodstream. When BDNF levels are high, acquiring new knowledge is easy. Memories are retained, people feel happier. And this is a very natural antidepressant. But when BDNF levels fall, the opposite occurs. Difficulty in learning new things. Memory loss can start to occur, and depression becomes much more common. So I want to go into some questions. I'm going to let me just mention a little bit about how BDNF can be increased. It's actually some of the things we talked about. Physical exercise will increase it. Intellectual activity will increase it. Being in ketosis, where you have a nightly fast, this increases BDNF if you're just on a breakfast and lunch program. Being social and nurturing relationships increases it. Being in sunlight, reducing stress and managing your emotions, as well as getting at least 7 hours of sleep per night. But interestingly, BDNF does not go down with sleep deprivation if you're on a regular aerobic exercise program. And it can actually protect us. So if you're having insomnia, this is no reason not to exercise. It's actually more of a reason to exercise, because if you stay fit, even with sleep deprivation, your BDNF will not go down. And then once the brain biochemistry improves, that's when we start working on the thoughts. And this is, of course, challenging. Speaking of the thoughts, the human brain is constructed so it will always set itself upon something. This idea that we can empty our mind and be thoughtless while we are awake is actually an irrational fallacy, and it's been actually disproven. The average individual will have between 12,000 and 60,000 separate thoughts per day. That means we're averaging 750 thoughts an hour, and that's at least 12 thoughts a minute on the lower end, and maybe up to 5 times that amount. But studies show, even in the typical human being that isn't necessarily diagnosed with mental illness, 80% of those thoughts tend to be negative in our fallen brains, and 95% of them repetitive. This is why neuroplasticity is key, because these repetitive thoughts become highways in our brain. And our brain's neurons are the oldest living cells in the body. These are the cells that were formed first when we were a fetus, and they actually continue to live. They're not replaced, they live until the person dies. And the pathways in the brain form as a result of our repetitive thoughts. The more you think a certain thought, the deeper that pathway becomes. And if you think about something often or long enough, you'll come to a stage where you cannot stop thinking about it. And this is where the rumination and the unwanted repetitive thoughts come in. Our repetitive thoughts become a groove, and then attitudes and actions follow. And those thoughts repeated become deeply embedded. This study showed feeling down was associated with greater communication between brain areas involved in emotion and memory. Communication between the limbic system, that's the lower brain, amygdala, and the memory portion of the brain without involvement of the frontal lobe will make you even more into negative thoughts. And this is why we have to wake up the frontal lobe of the brain in order to heal the brain ultimately. And this is an area of the brain that is often totally overlooked in most mental health treatment programs. They will just ignore the frontal lobe almost entirely. But Proverbs says, keep and guard your heart with all vigilance, for out of it spring the issues of life. The new NLT, someone help me with that. It's a type of translation of the Bible, says this: guard your heart, it affects everything you do. This means we should not be emotional reasoners, and we can actually do this. To guard your mind, you must listen to your thoughts, elevate them to your frontal lobe to analyze them as acceptable or unacceptable, because if you don't, an unwanted groove will develop in your brain that will affect your attitude, which will affect your emotions, and then your actions, and finally, your life destiny. One of the things we model in our program and make it clear is that we can actually elevate our mind on things daily. Let this mind be in you, says Paul, which was also in Christ Jesus. And he said, seek those things which are above. This is what Jesus did every day. He went up early before daybreak, went into a solitary place, and he set his affections on things above, not on things of the earth. And this is something that we can do in our devotional life. You want to change your thought patterns, you have to make a conscious choice to change your focus. And this is one of the exciting things in our program with people that don't think they have any spirituality, or they don't have any useful spirituality, or it's totally incongruent. Begin to see how this exercise dramatically starts to change the brain. To change your focus, change what you're paying attention to. And you cannot expect to think heavenly thoughts when you're going after what your emotional desires pull you to on the internet or through Hollywood dramas, movies, or YouTubes. The mind of Christ is indeed important. In the morning, rising up a great while before day, he went out, departed into a solitary place, and there prayed. Claiming the promises of God with the word out loud. And then actually, if we come across something in the word that gives us a command, asking God if we're in compliance with the command. This is something that will set our affections on things above and will change us for the better. And when we do this, we'll actually feel better than for watching our most favorite movie The feelings will actually be better, as well as we realize we have become a better person. And so this is the frontal lobe exercise that we teach individuals. And I know I'm getting a lot of people from Europe and London that say, well, it's different in America. It's actually not that different anymore. Atheism and agnosticism is at an all-time high, and we do have atheists and agnostics in all of our programs. But it's amazing what can happen once their brain heals, and the difference that can be made in leading them through this process. And we do it tactfully. We do it with, I believe, the influence of the Holy Spirit. But what a difference it makes. And these agnostics and atheists soon become believers. And they soon become very excited about the Word of God, because they realize it's a mental health book that can help them in so many ways. And when they can have the influence of the Spirit of God in their life, they've noticed what a difference it makes. And so this is part of comprehensive healing, transforming the brain. And it's one of the, I would say, the most exciting thing that I'm involved in. And of course, I get the privilege of being involved in this on a regular basis. But there's nothing more gratifying than seeing a mind that is totally darkened and totally problematic turn into a mind that is now useful, healthy, happy, and fulfilled, and makes a transformative influence in those around them. But this is what can happen and does happen when we deal with the root issues that have brought about the mental illness. So I know I think I went a little over 40 minutes. But I'm willing to still, if you have time, spend as much time as you have. We talked about 20 minutes for questions and answers, but let's open it up for questions and answers, and I'll take the time that you need for this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nedley, for your enlightening presentation. We have had a couple of questions come through, so I'll just start them. The first one is, how can parents raise children who are mentally healthy?
Okay, well, it gets into behaviors and thoughts again. And so children love a structured environment. They love to be able to, they may not seem like it at the time, but it's far better for them to go to bed at a regular time and get up at a regular time. And it's also far better to not expose them to screens. In fact, the studies on screens are showing you really shouldn't have anyone under the age of 12 be exposed to screens if you want them to be mentally healthy. They need to be involved in real things, and even real toys, and being able to work with their hands in 3 dimensions, and being able to, Legos is one of the rudimentary ways of starting and being able to build things. But if at all possible, getting them out in agriculture, getting them outdoors, getting them exercising, getting them playing things where they're having to work with their hands. This is vitally important. And then also giving them the opportunity for family devotions. And then having that loving environment of loving accountability. We don't want to be Gestapo parents in regards to the accountability part of things. It always has to be mixed in with mercy and love. But if we give up the accountability, and this is the problem with broken homes, many times the parents are competing for who can be the most popular, and the most popular is the one who's least accountable. What a terrible environment that's going to be. In fact, we just had a 19-year-old girl come through our program, and she had panic attacks, all sorts of problems every day, and all sorts of meds, was just a problem teenager, and started self-mutilation, all of those things. But her parents broke up at an early age, and she went to live with her mother because her mother provided no accountability. And when she was at the father, she had to actually obey house rules and go to bed on time and get up on time. And so she chose the mother. But at age 19, even at the beginning of the program, I said, do you think you made a wise decision there? She says, no, I should have been with my father. And I asked her, so who's paying for this program? Well, you can guess. It was the father who was paying for the program. But fortunately, even her brain was able to change. After 19 years of no discipline, getting on a structured program at age 19 and getting all these health components, within 5 days, her panic attacks were gone. And she was starting to have all of the signs of mental health starting to form in her. And her father was so thrilled when he picked her up 10 days later and saw her brain change. But we had to tell her, this is not, you started the change. You need to continue on this lifestyle. That's why we call it a 20-week program. And so that's a little bit of how we can raise mentally healthy children.
Great, thank you. Another questioner says, is there a role of, or what is the role of fasting on mental health? Is it good or not good for you?
Okay, so if an individual has metabolic syndrome, and this is where they're a pre-diabetes or they actually have diabetes, fasting will be very healthy for them. It will help to reset the brain. It will bring BDNF up, and or if they're just overweight. And so virtually all of our overweight individuals, we will actually start their program out with a fast. And of course, it's a medically supervised fast. Many of these people have never fasted a day in their life, and they've never skipped a meal a day in their life. So this is really, they're here for anxiety and depression, but they think their anxiety and depression is going to go way up as a result. But they actually find out they do pretty well. And their mind is able to function. They're still able to focus in the lectures. And they do pretty well. Now, in our 10-day program, we'll only fast them a day. If we're doing a 19-day program, we might fast them for up to 3 days. And then after that, we'll put them on a daily ketosis plan of breakfast and lunch and no supper. And that will actually help their brain change much quicker. It's going to improve the neuroplasticity. But we also have individuals that are underweight, and they have significant issues, and anxiety will actually make them hurt when they eat, or they have nausea or those type of things. Those individuals don't need a fast, and we'll actually have them on a good 3-meal-a-day program doing the underlying things to help their anxiety or depression so their appetite improves and they're able to eat without all of these symptoms. And these individuals actually gain weight in our program, which they need to do. Many of them are underweight, and they'll feel good about that. So fasting isn't for everybody, but a good share of humanity that comes to our program will actually improve with it.
Great, thank you. I have 2 questions which I'm going to combine, or from 2 different people, which I'm going to combine in one. It's, you said that genetics loads the gun and lifestyle triggers it. Is there a specific lifestyle you would recommend? And I'm mixing that with what foods are specifically good for the brain. Okay.
Well, there are some general things that can help any of these mutations. Exercise, for instance, is going to help no matter what your mutation is. And also a more plant-based diet is going to help no matter what your mutation is. A healthy, high in antioxidant plant-based diet. But there may be, I'll just deal with the most common genetic issue that people have when they come to our program. These are undermethylators. These are individuals that come with personalities of an undermethylator. They have a calm exterior, but a very tense interior. They have a tendency to ruminate, a tendency for obsessions. They also are high achievers. They make good grades in school, or if they're on the sports field, they have to win. They tend to be very competitive. And they're not the most naturally empathetic individuals as well. So they're not necessarily the best neighbors unless they really kind of try to force themselves or make themselves accountable in regards to that. An overmethylator, which is another genetic issue, they're much more naturally empathetic because they have much higher serotonin activity. So with an undermethylator, we'll actually be able to measure this in the bloodstream. And undermethylators are going to be very important that they have enough B12. Their B12 level needs to be above 500. They need to have folate levels above 15 in the bloodstream. So we might have to really focus on getting them enough of the folic acid and folate in the actual food. So we might actually alter their diet that way. They also need more calcium and they need more magnesium as well. And for some of them, genetically, they might need a supplement like S-adenosylmethionine. This is something your own body makes, but that methionine, S-adenosylmethionine, is very important for producing the last step, the methyl group. And that's why they're called an undermethylator. It adds a methyl group to make serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. So they might be down in all three of those as a result of their undermethylation. And if we give them a good diet, exercise, light is also going to be very important, even more important for them. And then maybe a supplement like S-adenosylmethionine. Then we can actually remeasure their methylation and find out it's actually working fine and that genetic defect has gone away. So sometimes there's a role of healthy supplements. These are supplements that our body utilizes. They're not foreign drugs like the SSRIs that have the side effects. And so there are certain genetic issues where we will actually supplement them to correct their genetic defect.
Great, thank you. I've had two people ask, based on your presentation today, are there any books you would specifically recommend on kind of thoughts and mental health so that they can read?
Well, The Lost Art of Thinking is a book that has helped many. It has the first part of it is actually dealing with the thoughts, the 10 different ways. There's a chapter on each of the 10 different ways of distorted thinking that all of humanity can get involved in, including myself, and how to recognize that and correct that. And the last half of the book has to deal with nutrition and sleep and behaviors that are going to improve our hardware of our brain. So it's a balanced book in looking at the software and hardware components. And it's an easy read. It's something you can even read to your kids. So The Lost Art of Thinking.
Thank you. We have a question. How do you support elderly parents who have mental health issues or their health is deteriorating? And I'll mix that with a question that says, how do you tips for those who are living or working with people who have depression? How can we help them?
Okay, so the first one was on elderly parents. Is that what
Yes.
you said?
Yeah, first one was elderly, second was just general people with depression.
Yes, well, of course, when we're living with people, and depression has become so common throughout the world that either you have it yourself or you know someone that has it. That's how common it is. You can't be in life for very long without actually knowing someone that has these mental health challenges. And when we're living with them, it does make it more challenging. I would encourage, whether they're elderly or whether they're not, to actually, if they're not able to, at least avail themselves of an online depression and anxiety recovery program, to avail themselves of learning more about the mind. It makes it a little more difficult if they are in denial of their mental health issues. So on our website, we have a test that's free that anyone can take. And if they answer it honestly, it will actually identify if they have depression and to what degree they have it. Many people deny they have depression because they're not sad. Sadness is only one of the 9 diagnostic hallmark symptoms, and you only need 5 of 9 to actually have depression. So there's a lot of people with depression, particularly males, that don't feel sad, and so they're in denial, but yet they have lack of focus and concentration, or they have apathy and lack of motivation, or they have sleep problems, or they might even have more severe issues like feelings of worthlessness and without the sadness. And so these are things that are important for people that are in denial, to have them take a standardized test and see where they're at. And once they realize they have an issue, they may be more motivated to do what it takes to learn about it and see what they can do to reverse it, because it'll be well worth any effort they put into it.
Great, thank you. Another question is, how can someone do a mental detox?
A mental detox. Well, part of a mental detox is actually what we call a dopamine fast. And you can actually look it up. It's called Dopamine Fasting 2.0. This is where we actually quit doing things that are harmful for us, or we actually, even if things might be healthy for us periodically, if they're producing a real euphoric high, it's actually best that we actually fast from those things for a while. And this is what we call a detox, and from the mental health standpoint. And it actually helps to reset our dopamine receptors so that we're actually pursuing healthier things. And if we do something that does do euphoria, studies show if you do euphoric things on a daily basis, it will cease to be as euphoric. And it will actually start to down-regulate our brain chemistry. We can do healthy things like exercising and going for a walk and being in nature. That'll produce a nice dopamine high without the skyrocketing euphoria part of things. And that'll help heal the brain. But staying away from things that we're especially prone to go to in order to try to feel better for the short term. That's probably one of the best ways of doing a detox. And of course, detox might also include not utilizing drugs like marijuana and other mind altering things that are actually producing short-term gain and long-term problems. And of course, we can help you through that in our addiction section on our online sessions so that you do that healthfully.
Great. A lot on that note, a lot of people are asking the site of your website, and can they do the online training programs, or is there things they can do from England on your website?
Yeah, the website, you could go, I think probably the easiest is drnedley.com. And then there's going to be some banners on the residential program, on the online program, community-based programs, because there are programs, community, that people have been trained by us. That's the training the trainer, to be a coach for people going through the actual program, and they might be putting on programs in your local area. So you can click on any of those boxes to find the best approach that you can avail yourself of.
Great. Just the last couple more questions on Mix2. So one is, are there any multivitamins which are good that you can take? And are there any natural products that are documented to work specifically to do with problem sleeping?
Okay, so the first one was, well, let's deal with the sleep issue first, natural products. One of them is actually catnip. It's something that we will utilize in our program. And it comes in a tea, or you can utilize it in a capsule. It actually comes from an herb, and it will really help to slow down your brain and help you to get sedated and sleep. And it's not habit forming, and it's not addictive. Melatonin is something we can also use, but melatonin over the course of the long haul has its disadvantages as well. It's far better to train our brain to make it than taking it externally. But if we do take it externally, it's best to take it sublingually, because we break it down too much in the stomach. And so those are two natural ones. Melatonin is probably more popular because it's been studied more, but catnip is very healthy. And there's a few other ones like L-theanine that can be helpful as well naturally in sleeping. But I should mention this regarding sleep. There's nothing that can compete with the light box. And after 7 days, it doesn't work right away, but after 7 days, this will help reset your circadian rhythm, and you'll be able to sleep without any of those supplements, which will be healthy. And then you asked, let's see, what was the first question?
Just multivitamins in general. Is there any one?
Vitamins, or as Americans we say, multivitamins. Saffron is actually not a vitamin per se. It's an herbal preparation that has been shown to be equivalent to using antidepressants. And it also doesn't have the adverse effects of those antidepressants. So that's something that seems to be able to help all groups. But there's, as far as vitamins are concerned, probably the only vitamin that's a one-size-fits-all would be B12. B12 isn't going to hurt you, particularly in its hydroxycobalamin form. And so this is the most detoxifying B12, hydroxycobalamin. 20% of individuals do not have adequate B12 to be able to methylate adequately. And so you can either measure your B12 level. If it's above 500, you're fine. But if you don't have a way of measuring it, just taking the smallest B12 supplement you can take in hydroxycobalamin on a daily basis or even a weekly basis is kind of a good general health rule for all of us.
Great. The next question is being about migraines. Is there any link of migraines to stress? And do you have any tips for this?
Absolutely, yeah. There are links to, we have so many people with migraine headaches in our program, and stress, anxiety, depression, these are front and center in what can be causing it. And so as we deal with the mental health issues behind the migraines, often those migraines will go away completely. But you can also have migraines that are sensitive to certain foods. Migraines are actually when we get marked vasodilatation, these throbbing headaches normally occurring on one side of the brain or the other. And there are certain natural things that can be helpful. Even ginger, for instance, has been shown to be very helpful for those throbbing headaches. And then we would want to deal with the underlying issues. Often it's a riboflavin problem, not enough B2. So we will make sure our migraine patients get enough B2, enough magnesium, and there's another herb called butterbur. And as they build this up in their system, their migraines will tend to get a lot better. And that while we're doing that, of course, we're dealing with the underlying mental health issues or challenges that can make migraines more common.
Great. Someone has asked, are you able to explain a little bit about high functioning depression? And I'll mix that with what if a person acknowledges they have depression, but is not taking up the support? What if they've spoken to professionals, etc.? How can we help them?
Okay. The first one on high functioning depression. There are high functioning people that have depression. They can carry a job, they can do their duties of life. They can actually compete in not only the workforce, but academically. Those tend to be your undermethylators. As I mentioned earlier, that the undermethylators can be more functional in their depression. But it's actually still adversely affecting them. It's not only adversely affecting maybe their mood, but it's also affecting their relationships. And even their workplace and academics would improve if they didn't have it. So as good as they are, they could be even better if their brain was more optimized. And so most people with depression and anxiety have levels of dysfunction that they don't even recognize. But compared to other people, they might still be fairly functional. So those are individuals that have a tendency to not want to come to programs because they think they're performing adequately. And so they're much more likely to try to take a pill if they notice they have it, or some short-term fix, and they're not really finding out what might be all the underlying issues that are doing it. It's one of the reasons why we came up with the depression anxiety assessment test, because a lot of people they're not recognizing the actual underlying causes in them bringing it about. So the first thing I might have them do is take the DAT test, which you can take online, depression and anxiety assessment test. And that can tell us, that one does have a feed to it because of all of the science and the grading system that has to take place in it. But it's well worth the results, because then you can see what your underlying issues are that need to be actually dealt with. And then the second question was, what if people want to, or they're maybe seeing professionals but not getting better, or they're not seeing professionals at all?
The question was, what if the person acknowledges they have depression but is not taking up support? How can we help them further?
Okay, yeah, if they're not taking up support, a lot of times they have a tendency to do this because they don't think the support's going to be helpful. And maybe they've already seen their doctor, maybe they've already seen some things, and a doctor or a therapist, and doesn't quote seem to be working. Don't get discouraged. Those were just patch jobs, and you probably didn't have a comprehensive approach. The comprehensive approach is simpler than you might think, and it's actually enjoyable. The whole process is enjoyable, but it does take some effort. So I would recommend, once again, even those individuals to take the DAT test and see what it is actually that's causing their depression. so that they can start working on those aspects that are there.
Great. So just coming up to the last couple of questions to end. Someone has asked, how long would you recommend somebody sit in front of a light box daily for the best results?
For depression, we recommend a minimum of 30 minutes a day. The studies show you actually do better in an hour a day, but with our program, we have so many other things going on, 30 minutes is enough. But if you have some major issues and you have the time, an hour a day of this blue light therapy will be helpful. Now, once they get better, we'll have them go down to just 20 minutes for maintenance. So once depression improves and the sleep improves and you're better, you just need about 20 minutes of that in the morning. We even have wearables now, the wearable light glasses where you can put over your glasses, or if you don't have glasses, you can walk around while you're getting ready in the morning and getting that blue light into your brain. And just 20 minutes of that is enough for maintenance and keeping things mentally healthy, as well as your circadian rhythm healthy as well.
Great. I've had someone ask, can you repeat the name of the brain supplement starting with A? I'm not sure if you remember the supplement you mentioned.
I don't know that I recommended anything starting with A. I recommended S-adenosylmethionine. Maybe that's the A.
I think that's probably it.
S dash and then adenosylmethionine.
Great. Thank you very much.
So when you see it in the store, it's going to be capital SAM and a small e.
Great. So lastly, is there anywhere for people to go? Do you have a YouTube channel so people can watch more videos from yourself and to see more?
Yeah, we do. We have Let's Talk Mental Health. Those are a number of YouTube videos on a lot of different subjects, and not only myself, but others from our staff. You'll see our therapists interviewed. You'll see how they're working on things. You'll see the counselor aspect, as well as even the person who's the exercise physiologist that works with our patients. And so if you would Google Let's Talk Mental Health with Nedley, you'll probably find that site and be able to go back and see a lot of different topics.
Great, thank you very much. We would just like to say a massive thank you for coming on to our Zoom today and talking to us. I know a lot of people would like to follow up with reading and the advice you have given, so thank you very much. And as it's morning there, we hope you have a great day for the rest of your day.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure, and I certainly hope this is helpful, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much. We are now just going to open the chat for people to talk. So once again, we thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
And for those who are asking, this has been recorded on YouTube, so you can go to the Hampstead SDA site on YouTube and rewatch any recordings that you may have missed.
Oh, yes. Goodness me.